Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, I am supposed to talk to you about week five. And in week five, we were talking about the elections of, I believe it is 1992 to 2012. And last week, we were supposed to discuss I think it's supposed to be 1972 to 1988 because we discussed 1960 the last time and how debates were televised, and they really, that was the first time. And until 1972, that was the only time that debates were seen on television. And we know how those debates really pushed us into having a more personal or parasocial relationship with our presidential candidates. What happened between 1960 and 1972? Well, what happened was that number one, they didn't want to do them. And number two, there were limited resources to do them. And number three, they couldn't figure out how to suspend Section 315 of the Fairness Doctrine at the time. And they just didn't do it. And so in 1972, we really have our first debate back after that hiatus. Now, in between the 1960 and 1972 elections, several things happened, not the least of which included, let's see, the, uh, oh yeah, Kennedy got shot. Both of them. Martin Luther King got shot. There was a huge riot at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago in 68. There were civil rights fights all over the country. So there was a lot of unrest and upheaval in the country between 1960 and 1972. And I'm not suggesting they stopped in 1972. I'm just saying that that's sort of when things calmed down enough. They figured out how to do the debates, and so they did. Now, let me tell you that Nixon learned a lot from his first presidential debate on television, his first set of them, I should say, and improved greatly by 1972. We know that Carter didn't do a stellar job on television, but because he was a preacher, he really sort of came out of the 1976 race, obviously a winner, but also understanding how to use television a lot better. Unfortunately, that did not help him in 1980 when he lost to Ronald Reagan. And that was probably one of the biggest uh, presidential television events was during the debates in 1980 and 1984. 1984 is considered one of the muddiest, most dirty campaigns, election seasons in history. That has not changed a whole lot. If you're wondering who ran in 1984, obviously that would be Ronald Reagan with George H.W. Bush as his vice president against. Was it Walter Mondale in 84 with Geraldine Ferraro, I believe? In 88, we had Dukakis run against George H.W. Bush as president. And that was also an incredibly nasty and disturbing election cycle. I'll talk about that more when we get into political ads, but the political debates were not particularly stellar either. During the 1988 debates where we had George H.W. Bush. His vice president, of course, was Dan Quayle. Some of you probably don't know a whole lot about Dan Quayle, but probably the biggest thing to know is that he looked like he was 12. And so a lot of people like SNL, et cetera, joked about how young he was and how young he looked. He was a senator prior, but for some reason he just, came off as sort of inexperienced, naive, and not and ill prepared to be vice president. However, really, this was when you got a few of the comebacks, and actually, I have this wrong. That 84 would have been Mondale Ferraro. Yeah, 88 probably was Dukakis and who ran with him? Mondale, maybe. Um, I'm not really sure. That's really bad. I should remember these things. However, give me some slack because I was born in 1974 and so in 1988 or 1987 or yeah, I was young. Let's just put it that way. I don't want to talk about it. I was a teenager, but I was definitely not involved in politics to the extent that I should have been, or that really made me pay attention. What I do recall are two things from that. Number one, Dan Quayle misspelled potatoes. For some reason, that was a huge ordeal. And secondly, I remember Dan Quayle making a comment about being like John Kennedy, Jack Kennedy, and I believe that if it was Mondale or if it was somebody else, it was probably somebody else, turned to him and said, "I knew Jack Kennedy. You, sir, are no Jack Kennedy." One of the most famous lines in presidential debates that ever occurred. So during these elections, we don't have social media. We don't have, we have political ads up the wazoo, which we're going to talk about. But for the most part, during the 1972 to 1988 elections was a really what I call traditional presidential election because it was traditional to me. I was born in 74. That's what I was raised with was the idea of three presidential debates. And where they really got traction aside from negative advertisements was in the big magazines and in the newspapers. I remember Time Magazine and Newsweek, The Economist, Christian Science Monitor, things like those big, huge magazines being right in your face at the airports, in the bookstores, on the newsstands, etc., that showed pictures of what was his name? Michael Dukakis in a tank for some reason. It was one of the weirdest things that we've ever seen. I remember Michael Dukakis being asked during the presidential debates what he would do if his wife, Kitty, was raped. Would he want there to be the death penalty? It was the worst, grossest questions I have ever heard out of the media. Believe it or not, still to this day, these were horrible experiences that we can find clips of all over YouTube. All you have to do is YouTube Michael Dukakis, Kitty Dukakis, death penalty, and you'll find it. Or look up Dan Quayle, Jack Kennedy. You'll find all these videos. They are there. They're not hard to find. And then, of course, I can't talk about 92 yet. We're still just going up to 88. So what were some of the major themes during that time? Well, we had the oil and resource crisis throughout the 1970s. You had the steel mills in the mid 80s. You had the revamping of the American economy. You had what's known as Reaganomics, and you had the idea of youth and elderly. So age became a huge issue because Dan Quayle was viewed as too young and Ronald Reagan was viewed as too old. There was a time when Ronald Reagan was our oldest president ever, and somehow we're just getting older. I'm not really sure how that works or why that happens, but it does. Those years, and I'm taking those years specifically for a reason, that decade and a half, if you will, and really 2 decades. Those 2 decades of presidential campaigns were unique in of themselves because of all of those issues that the country was facing, and also because the narrative was constantly the same. American exceptionalism and fighting communism. And by communism, I mean the Russians. We were still really, the remnants of the Cold War were still hanging on. We didn't tear down the wall in Germany until, it was Ronald Reagan. So it's after 88. It was 89 or so. And then, the Cold War supposedly ended with that. And yeah, I mean, I think it did, but there was a lot of fallout from the disintegration of the USSR. Um, so I believe it stood for the was it the United Soviet something Republic, Socialist Republic, something along those lines. It's terrible that I can't remember. My geography is bad enough. But when the USSR split, certain things started to happen. The Balkan states, particularly Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia, probably the worst, really started to have an economic downfall. They couldn't handle things themselves. It turned out that what was going on in Russia was not what we thought was going on in Russia as far as the economics were concerned. We tried selling them McDonald's. They were like, what the hell is this? We opened them up into the capitalistic Western world. And so lots of friction, but nothing that would have led us to the global thermonuclear war that all of us were living in fear of, from the 60s and the 70s and into the 80s. Okay. So the Cold War had to be managed, and also the arms race. If you really want to entertain yourself, during the 1988 election, there were deep questions, or I'm sorry, not 1988. And during the 1980 and 84 elections, there were deep questions about Ronald Reagan's sanity, in the sense of, and I don't mean that as derogatory. I mean that literally, as in, was he starting to get dementia from his old age? Was he able to run the country? Why, during the trials of Oliver North and the Iran-Contra affair, why was President Reagan constantly saying, I do not recall, I do not recall, I do not recall? Was it that was the best answer or defense, or was it because literally he couldn't remember anymore? And so the mental state of the president, this is the first time that came into question. So we started seeing this in our popular culture. If you listen to the song called "The Russians" by Sting, who was the lead singer of the Police, and if you don't know who any of those people are, I don't know what to do about that, but you can Google it. Okay, so Sting is the guy's name. I'm not joking. Gordon Sumner is his real name, but uh, uh, you can check that out. He had a song called "The Russians," and you can get the lyrics to it. And it really talks about how people felt trapped between the United States and the USSR at the time. Um, and then there was a song by Genesis that was called "The Land of Confusion." It's been redone, but the original video really gives you a sense. By the way, it's done with puppets, which is fascinating. And it really gives you a sense of the fear that people had of what was going to happen with Ronald Reagan as president. So I don't know how much different that is than our presidential elections running into popular culture. If I recall correctly, Pink has a song called "Dear Mr. President." She has a song called what is it? "What About Us?" that I think is directed at Donald Trump. There are a lot of times when pop culture, particularly music, becomes influenced by what's going on with elections or politics at the time. So anyway, those two songs, "The Russians" by Sting and "Land of Confusion," particularly with the video, are worth a watch, I'll be honest with you, to give you a sense of what was going on in politics at the time. Um, the negative advertisements that were shown, like I said, during this time period were stunning. Okay, just stunning. So what I'm going to do is I am going to actually link, if you want, well, I can link those two songs too, if you want the videos to them or the lyrics or whatnot. But I'm gonna pull out some of the really memorable negative advertisements from the 1980s, where I question their ethics. I question whether or not, I mean, I know their effectiveness. Negative ads were very, very effective in the 1980s and 90s, particularly. Nowadays, we have a different question about them because social media has kind of changed the way that we view political advertising. But at the time between 1972 and 1988, they definitely were very effective. There was also a very famous political ad by the Reagan administration, and it was called "There's a Bear in the Woods" or "A Bear in America." No, I'm sorry. Did I say a bear in the woods? There is a bear in the woods thing, but there's also "It's Morning in America," which is one of the most famous political ads that you're ever going to see. So I want to show you some of those, and I want you to respond to them. I haven't figured out exactly how I want you to respond to them just yet, but when I post the links to those, I will post the question for you for the discussion board on Blackboard. I hope that helps. I hope that was clear. So today we talked a little bit about the 1972 through 1988 presidential elections and what was important during those campaigns. I'm going to be linking for you some videos for you to watch and probably an article for you to read. And then I'm going to ask you to respond to Blackboard. For now, I'll keep this super short because why not? And also because I don't want to just repeat to you what you end up watching or what you end up reading. That seems silly. So I'll go ahead and post those now, and I will talk to you all very, very soon. I also wanted to let you know that it sucks, but a friend of mine who specializes in mass media and politics was supposed to give us a video lecture for this week, and I was really excited about it. And she just didn't get it done, so I feel really bad about that. But it would have been a really cool video, and hopefully at some point she will do one for us. She's an incredibly brilliant scholar from Wisconsin. And she'll be really really fascinating. So that's why this week is less planned out than usual. I kind of counted on her doing it for me, and well, you know how group work works, right? So hopefully you'll forgive me for that small oversight, and we'll learn something this week anyway. All right, I'll talk to you all soon. Bye bye.